just remind him where he cut off at the point where he said we should have made incentivizing other behavior.
Yeah. So first of all, if you lose me again, I'm having a problem with my internet. Cox Cable was over today. They've tried to fix it, but I don't know what's happening. There's something on our block where they were doing some work. So in any case, I've got a tentative connection here. In any case, what we're talking about is that for the last several hundred years, society has made certain decisions that are now coming home to roost. Is the bottom line. We have neglected large segments of our society, and you can blame whoever you want. It really doesn't matter whether you blame the people themselves who are not working hard enough or not educating themselves, or whether you blame the bankers who redlined their territories, or whether you blame the original slave owners that shipped people over here. It's kind of irrelevant. The bottom line is that we have this condition, right? And we have tinderboxes of discontent that exist around the United States. And these tinderboxes of discontent are areas of hopelessness and despair. And in these areas, people don't feel that they have upward mobility. I believe there was a group of cultural Marxists called the Frankfurt Group that met in Germany at the end of World War II. Actually, they were there earlier. They were there in the 1920s, and then they moved around. Ultimately, went back to Frankfurt. They were in the United States for a time, but they were called the Frankfurt Group. And essentially, the concept, the thing that these philosophers were trying to figure out was, why has communism not taken hold in the United States, right? What is it? They believed that communism was a wonderful thing, and that, the promise of Karl Marx and Marxism was that it would grow all over the world and become, the dominant ideology and form of government. And it didn't. It wasn't well received in the United States. And so certainly not like it was in Russia. And so the question was, the question that these philosophers then presented themselves to try to solve was, well, it's not communism, they felt. They felt that communism was virtuous and that it ought to be adopted around the world. So the question to them then became, well, why isn't it taking hold in the United States? And so that became their query, right? That became the thing that they all sat around and talked about and philosophized on and studied and tried to answer. And they decided that the answer was that there must be something in the United States that is preventing communism from taking hold, right? Something that's different about the United States than the Soviet Union, that is preventing communism from taking hold. And they thought, well, if we could identify that, and if we could get rid of it, then communism could take hold, right? So they thought about, well, what are the institutions that are oppressive to the masses, right? So the police force, right? The police force incarcerates 700,000 young people a year for marijuana, right? So that's oppressive, right? There's racial disparity and discrimination within our policing and criminal justice system. So there's a lot of issues within our criminal justice system that create inequities. There are similar things going on in our banking system that create inequities, and in our political system. So the idea was to identify these things that create inequities and then challenge those systems and try to bring them down, right? And so that was, part of the strategy. And if you get rid of the police, if you get rid of, if you restrain the banking system, if you take away these impediments to communism, then communism will eventually flourish, was the idea. And the methodology that they developed was called critical theory. And critical theory, as opposed to traditional theory is basically, let's take a look at a problem and let's try to analyze the problem to try to find out what the truth is. Let's find out, if there's something wrong with policing, let's find out what's wrong with policing and let's fix it, right? That's how you and I would generally approach a problem. We'd say, okay, if you're not happy with policing, let's take a good, cold, hard, objective look at policing. Let's figure out where the problems are and let's change them. Maybe we have too many white police officers in communities of color, right? Maybe our police force should more accurately reflect the community that it serves. Maybe we should have more Black and minority officers in those communities. That might be a traditional approach towards fixing a problem. Critical theory doesn't work that way. Critical theory is not interested in solving or changing the system, solving the problem or changing policing. Critical theory is designed to criticize and to bring down and to bring about change through taking down a system that you are critical of. So you find a system that's standing in your way and you criticize that system. America, its history, its founding fathers, the whole, magical description of, how America was founded and the beauty and the majesty behind these incredible, collection of geniuses who came up with a system that endured for 250 years. Instead of that story, tell a story about, slave owners and wealthy white old men and change the whole narrative and attack it and be critical of it, tear down the statues, get rid of it. Don't try to fix it. It's not like, America has some faults. Let's fix those faults. Let's make it better. That's traditional analysis. That's traditional theory. Critical theory is, no, it's bad. Let's criticize it and let's get rid of it. Let's remove it. And I think that is part of what we're seeing today, because the actors, some of the primary actors behind things like the Black Lives Matter movement are cultural Marxists, right? So they certainly believe these things. And, I'm not suggesting that all people that support Black Lives Matter think this. I believe that Black lives do matter, right? I believe that major reform needs to take place in our criminal justice system. I believe that policing is imperfect. I believe, that changes are required, but I don't believe in defunding police or abandoning police or abolishing ICE or doing these types of things. I believe in fixing the problems as opposed to, just declaring them to be, horrible, failed institutions, right? But that's not the approach of a cultural Marxist. So, when you're having these conversations with people, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a diehard cultural Marxist, understand that the exchange, the dialogue, you can't really have a dialogue with a cultural Marxist about the police, because a true cultural Marxist does not want to reform the police. They want to get rid of the police. And no other alternative short of getting rid of it is adequate. And so if someone is coming at me with that kind of a dialogue, that's not a dialogue. And so my feeling is that there are certain, when you examine the way the human brain works and you examine how we develop our thought processes and how they harden over time, and depending on the echo chambers that we're involved in, how we, get these harder and harder views, some people are more difficult to have a conversation with than others. Just like the mentally ill. some people are going to be much more difficult to cure their mental illness or resolve their mental illness than someone else who may just have anxiety, right? So my approach towards that is a bit like triage, which is that I prefer to spend my time working with the people who I can influence in the most time efficient and cost efficient way than trying to spend day after day transforming a cultural Marxist into somebody who's going to have an open mind, right? I'd rather instead work with someone who is really doesn't know what to think and doesn't have firm views. They have views, they have beliefs, they have thoughts, but they're not wedded to a particular course of action or a particular philosophy. They're open-minded, or they're willing to have a dialogue. They're willing to learn. They're willing to have an exchange of ideas. Those are the people that I think we need to try to interact with and try to convince it, not in the merits of any particular position, but in the merits of having an open mind, searching for the truth, and having a dialogue. Hold on a second. I'm going to turn this light on. So essentially, the key, I believe, to getting past all of this is ultimately, I believe that number one, division, the intense, hardening division that we have in this country is the greatest existential threat that we face as a nation. I believe that researchers have gone back and have documented that we are more polarized as a nation today, more politically polarized than we were during the civil rights movement or during the Vietnam War. Only 160 years ago, during the Civil War, was America as divided as it is today. I believe that's the biggest threat that we face as a nation. And I believe that we need to address that, and that we do that through communication, through improved communication, through greater empathy, through a greater recognition of the mistakes that we've made as a society, taking corrective action towards those mistakes, and entering into and encouraging and facilitating an open mind, a search for the truth, an increased dialogue with those who are willing to engage in that kind of activity. And those who aren't, I'm not going to spend my time on, right? I'm not going to sit and have conversations with a diehard cultural Marxist. It's not worth my time. If they want to walk off a cliff and in blissful ignorance, then that's their choice. But I want no part of it, and I don't have time for that. It's just too hard a road to hoe. The same is true if somebody, is suffering from a serious mental illness. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a priest. I don't have the skill set to deal with those people. And again, it would take way too much time and too much effort to try to get that one person to see what I see. And again, I believe as Socrates did, that I'm really not trying to get you to believe what I believe. I really don't care so much what you believe. I care that you come about your beliefs through a search for the truth, and through an open receipt of information, and through a critical analysis process. And then it's perfectly fine if you think very differently than I do. You don't need to think the way I do. You just need to think. And so that's what I'm trying to teach people. I'm trying to teach people to think critically. I'm trying to teach people to have an open mind. I'm trying to teach them to understand that alternative perspectives add value to their lives. I believe that that's sort of the threshold approach that we need to take with people. All of us need to be talking to other people in a way that says, are you looking for the truth? First of all, are you looking for the truth? Because if you're looking for the truth, then we have something in common. I'm looking for the truth. You're looking for the truth. Now we have something to build upon, right? I'm willing to have an open mind because I understand that I don't have all the answers. Are you willing to have an open mind? And so these are some of the beginning threshold questions that I think that you start with when you're having dialogues with people. And if they are willing to search for the truth, and if they are willing to have an open mind, then you can begin to discuss some of these things, right? So you might want to do a little reading on cultural Marxism and a little reading on critical theory, right? And you can very quickly learn what the tenets of all of that is and how they think. And you know, in discussions of critical theory, there's a great article out of Stanford University, and there are many others, I'm sure, that talk about critical theory. And it will tell you in black and white that critical theory, which is practiced by cultural Marxists, is not a search for the truth. It's identify an institution that you don't want and then criticize it until it's dead. That's essentially critical theory, right? And so when you explain that to people, most of the rational, you know, intelligent people will say, well, I don't want to do that, right? I mean, that's not a good idea, right? We ought to be in a search for the truth, right? And if the truth is that communism is the best system, I'm willing to embrace it. If you can show me that that's the truth, right? I'm open to it. I mean, I am very seriously not wedded to a particular ideology or belief. I'm looking for what's real. And I'm trying to make decisions based on what's real, right? You know, it's interesting. I haven't done it in many months, but I used to love to play poker. And I would go into the Las Vegas casinos. I've played in the World Series 3 times. And I'm a pretty good poker player. And when I would play poker, what you need to understand about playing poker is that you want your opponent to act on inaccurate information. Okay, so Sun Tzu in The Art of War talks about war being the art of deception, right? So war is the art of deception. Well, poker is war and the art of deception, right? So when I have a strong hand, I don't want you basing your decisions on a realization that I have a strong hand. I want you basing your decisions on the assumption that I have a weak hand, right? And when I have a weak hand, I want you to be basing your decisions on the inaccurate assumption that I have a strong hand, right? I don't want you to know the truth. I want to hide the truth from you, right? So that you're making poor decisions based on inaccurate assumptions, right? Okay, so you know, that kind of highlights the fact that the truth leads us to make better decisions, right? When we know the truth, we are likely to make better decisions, right? And when we're operating on misinformation and falsehoods, we are more likely to make poor decisions, right? So that's kind of common sense. So if people understand that, then they should all want to be engaged in a search for the truth. They should all be open. Why would we not want communism if it's the best solution, right? If it's the best solution for the country, explain that to me, and I'll have an open mind. And if I believe it, I may agree with you. You know, I just have never had anybody be able to convince me of that proposition. Instead, I've seen the failure of the Soviet Union. I've seen how communism failed. I've seen, you know, what their history was under communism. I've seen what America's history was, right? And I've seen that capitalism has outperformed communism. However, I am now seeing the beginning failures and breakdown of capitalism, right? So I'm coming to the conclusion that these are all man-made constructs. communism, socialism, and capitalism are all imperfect man-made constructs, right? And the idea that any one of them is perfect, infallible, not requiring adjustment or modification is kind of a ridiculous assumption that has been proven wrong by history and is being proven wrong today, right? So we've seen the failures of communism. We know that wasn't a perfect system. We've seen socialism fail in countries like Venezuela and Cuba. And we've seen capitalism now falling apart at the seams in the United States, because this whole concept of, you know, personal responsibility and I'm not my brother's keeper, and, you know, sort of an economic Darwinism, that works for some people, right? It works for the strong. It works for the able. It works for the ingenious, you know, and the assertive and the aggressive. And, you know, certain types of personalities succeed in that system. And it's a brilliant system for those people, right? But there are many others that don't do as well, and that for, you know, centuries now have not done as well. And those people we've kind of pushed into the periphery of society. We've put them into areas that they could afford to live in. And these are, you know, typically rundown areas. They're crime-infested areas. They lack economic opportunity. They're less, you know, typically less clean areas. You know, the garbage removal doesn't come as often. The street cleaning doesn't happen as often. You know, they may not have street lights. You know, there are all sorts of things that some of these communities don't have. There's gunshots going off in the middle of the night. There's people standing on the corners dealing crack. You don't get that in my neighborhood, right? None of that's happening in my neighborhood, right? That's not the life that I'm living, right? So the life that I'm living makes me think, well, capitalism works. Capitalism's good. I like my neighborhood. It's well lit. It's safe. There's nobody on the corner. You know, it's beautiful. Geez, the system might be working. But to the guy that's living in that other neighborhood, and he's waking up every morning, and he's going down those streets, and his kids are walking down those streets to go to school, and his kids are trying to go to bed with gunshots going off, to him, the system isn't working, right? And so what we're seeing now is from decade upon decade, if not century upon century, of essentially benign neglect of some of these people who have not performed as well under the capitalist system. Those people are now in a state of hopelessness and despair. They lack aspiration. They don't believe that there is a future for them in America. They don't believe that America works for them. For them, there is no American dream. There's only an American nightmare, because that's what they're living, and that's what they're seeing, and that's what they believe their kids are going to live. And so I believe that the one thing that stopped communism from penetrating in the United States has always been the American dream, because the American dream was a better alternative for the average person. As long as the American dream was out there and it was real and it was available to me or to anybody else, then why would I choose communism, right? If I had a real fighting chance of improving my life dramatically and living like these billboards and these television commercials, you know, with, you know, beautiful women and great food and beautiful homes and fast cars, and if I had the opportunity for all of that, why on earth would I ever be sold on communism? You couldn't sell me on that in a million years if I thought I had a shot at this other life, right? But if I've become convinced that I have no such shot, and that my children have no such shot, and nobody I know has realized the American dream. It's all just on billboards in other neighborhoods that I don't live in, and I'm never going to get there. Well, then somebody who comes and sings this siren song of cultural Marxism and defund the police and abolish ICE and open the borders and let's all have a utopian society, well, that sounds pretty good, right? Sounds pretty good to me if I'm a guy who's never going to get the American dream and I'm living in poverty, right? So I think that that's where we are. I think that's where we are. And so the way that you solve that, and the way you work yourself out of that, is you've got to reinstill that impediment to communism, the American dream. You've got to make the American dream real again. And you've got to make it real, not just for the competent, educated, intelligent, assertive, outgoing, aggressive white male. You've got to make it available to everyone. And so you have to increase opportunity, right? Now, you're never going to create a completely, the idea isn't to try to say that you have to elevate all people to a similar, state of existence. That to me is communism. It's not elevating it all. It's reducing it all to a similar state of existence. But successful capitalism doesn't mean that everyone gets elevated to a higher level of existence. What it means is that everyone is on a level playing field, right? That we're all playing we're not playing a rigged game, we're playing a fair game, and everybody starts out relatively equally. That is a fair game. That is a game that more people can thrive in. And then for some who might not make the varsity team or might not be the top performers, we have training programs that help those people, right? So we help them do better, right? And again, they don't have to do it as well as the guys on Wall Street, but they have to have some skin in the game. They have to become property owners. They have to have gainful employment. They have to feel that they're part of America. If you're just renting, some shitty little apartment in a ghetto type neighborhood that does not belong to you, and you hate your landlord, you're not going to care for the property, you're not going to care for the neighborhood, you're not going to care for the country. But if you have, it's almost like the 40 acres and a mule. If you're given a piece of property, and maybe we should reinstitute the 40 acres and a mule, maybe it's not 40 acres anymore, maybe it's 4 acres, maybe it's an acre, and maybe it's not a mule, maybe it's something else, right? But there's a lot of talk today about reparations, right? And if we ever go down that road, if we ever decide that it is appropriate to do something for an entire race of people based on slavery, then my feeling would be that those reparations should be in the form of some type of perhaps a land entitlement that gives people a stake, that makes them become part of America and part of the American dream, and invests them along with all the other people who are invested in this country, invests them in the country, right? And so anyway, these are just some of my thoughts on what's going on. And I really didn't mean to give a presentation to you tonight. My whole point was really to answer your questions. So just to kind of get you thinking about where my thinking is, that's some of my thinking. And, I'm happy to listen to your ideas and thoughts and take your questions. And I may not be able to answer everything, but I'm certainly willing to try. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions or ideas?
Okay, let me start out. I pinned you so that you're front and center. I'm going to unpin you so we can see each other. George, first, before we get into questions, I want to make a point of one of the statements in your book that is fantastic. And I put a note in there for the link to the website to get his book about the millennials. It's an excellent book. One of the quotes in there is Frank Zappa: "A mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it's not open." That is a powerful, powerful statement. And that's everything what you've been saying that with your whole
Yes.
conversation. So with that, I would like to invite people to raise their hand and ask a question, or you can send me a chat question privately. If you don't want to be the owner of the question, I'll read it for you. Oh, Richard, what a surprise.
I do have a question. Well, I didn't get to read too much of your book. I tried to do what I could. It's been a bit of a week, but can you briefly go into some of the important, the mindsets that you spoke of about controlling your fear and preparing for the? Oh, actually, a lot of people on here weren't here for the last presentation. Can you briefly explain what the phrase "the tsunami of technological change" means?
Sure.
And then go into the mindsets and whatnot.
So the tsunami of technological change is that as disruptive as you think COVID-19 might be, there is a technological tsunami on the horizon that will hit us over the next 10 years and beyond. And significant changes are going to result as a consequence of advances in technology. For example, automation. Just take one element of technology. There are many, but just take automation. So today, you've got 3 million truck drivers. Chrysler Dahmer has already done cross-country trips with driverless semis. So over the next 5 to 10 years, those jobs will be gone. That's 3 million American males that will be out of work. It's the number one job for an American male today is truck driver. Those jobs are gone. Uber drivers. Today, there's 3.9 million of them, men and women. There's supposed to be like 5 million next year. And over the next 5 years, it's likely that those jobs will be gone because those cars will become driverless, whether it's 5 years or 10 years. Again, these numbers about the number of years are less relevant than the change itself. The change is coming. Whether it comes in 5 years or whether it comes in 10 years or whether it comes in 15 years is something that experts can debate. And some people think that we're much further along in artificial intelligence. Some people think that we're much further along in self-driving vehicles. And some people think that, no, these changes may take twice as long as some of those people think. I don't really care whether it takes 5 years or 10 years. What I'm saying is that it's going to happen. And when it does happen, millions of people are going to be out of work. And so we need to plan for that. We need to prepare for that. Clerical worker, number one job for an American female, 3 million of them, those jobs are going to be gone. Fast food workers, 8 million of them, those jobs eventually within the next 10, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years, those jobs are going to be gone. Anything that essentially can be automated will be automated. And this is going to cause significant economic disruption, right? The World Economic Forum forecasts significant economic disruption over the next 5 years. McKinsey and Company says that 47% of all jobs today in the United States are subject to automation based on existing technology. So we're in for a tsunami of technological change just on the employment horizon, okay? Forget about advances in genomics that may literally redefine life as we know it and what it means to be a human being. Those are a whole nother range of seismic tectonic changes that are coming that we could talk about as well. But the point is that we are going to experience radical change over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, and 30 years. And I don't believe we're ready for that. I don't believe that we're ready for that, and I don't believe that the public education system is well suited for that. It was designed in the early 1900s for the Industrial Revolution to teach people how to work in factories. And today, robots are going to be working in factories. So we don't need to teach people how to work in factories. We need to teach people how to successfully adapt to radically and rapidly changing circumstances. We need to teach them to think and think critically. We need to teach them resilience. We need to teach them how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. We need to teach them to constantly be in a position to reskill and recalibrate and retrain and pivot. And we need to teach them to remain viable and to make whatever contribution is going to be required of them in the next several decades. And I don't believe that the current education system is doing that at all. And I don't believe that it's going to do it. And frankly, I don't believe that the government's going to change it to make it happen. And the reason is that, there was a motivation for the government to create the public education system in the early 1900s. The motivation was that business needed a trained workforce. They needed labor that understood how to work machines. And so the government, in order to facilitate business and tax revenue and increase GDP and economic growth, they needed to create the public education system. Well, today, the government doesn't have that need. If robots can do everything that a human being can do, then they don't need a public education system to teach people how to work, because they're not going to be welcome in the employment arena anyway. So what do they need to teach them? Or what do people need to learn? So one issue is, what do they need to learn? And this is essentially how to think critically, how to pivot, how to adapt, how to learn, unlearn, relearn, reskill. These are the types of things: how to be more resilient, how to do things that only humans can do, that machines can't do. These are the types of things people need to learn. The government doesn't have the same incentive to teach people that they did in the early 1900s to teach people to man the factories. So the government may take a different approach. It may go with a universal basic income. It may just say, we're just going to give people $1,000 a week or $1,000 a month, whatever the number ends up being. And, we're just going to pacify them, essentially, keep them alive. We're going to tax the technological companies that are going to create all the wealth. They're going to provide the tax base, and we're going to further tax them for their increased efficiency and productivity and cost containment. We're going to tax that, and we're going to use that for UBI, for this universal basic income, and then just kind of leave people on their own and allow them and not worry about educating them. Just worry about appeasing them, and sort of like the Romans did with the Colosseum. The Romans, had a large population that was living in basically in poverty, and sometimes didn't have enough food, and certainly didn't have what a modern society has. And so one of the great things that government gave the Roman population were the games, right? The fighting, the gladiatorial combats, like our modern day football and NBA, right? So they gave them that to appease them, to keep them busy, to keep them occupied, to keep them from rioting. And UBI may be our modern Roman games, where it's a pacifier. I believe that human beings need to be taught, and they need to learn. And if government is not going to pick up that gauntlet and do what they need to do in that area, then it's going to have to come from somewhere else. And so when I looked at the private sector and I look at the educational opportunities in the private sector, most of those are predatory, right? So, whether it's a university system that you matriculate from with $100,000 in student debt, we have $1.5 trillion in student debt, which exceeds all credit card debt. The idea of coming out of college with $100,000 in debt, to me, is philosophically repugnant. We are ruining the lives of these people because they will never climb out of that debt, and we've made it non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, and so we've essentially put this yoke around these young people's neck that they have to carry with them for decades, and can't get out of. And it can prevent them from buying a home. It can prevent them from getting married. Fewer and fewer people are buying homes. Fewer and fewer people are getting married. And it's all a consequence of this increased debt and reduced opportunity and decreased earning capacity. And the value of our money is decreasing. Wages have remained relatively stagnant for the last 40 years. The idea that people, are making $8 an hour today, or $7 or $8 or $9 an hour, it's hardly a livable wage, and it's certainly not going to be a livable wage as inflation continues. And so, we have to address these things, and how are we going to address them? So those are some of the challenges that we have in front of us. It's interesting because there's a quote from Peter Guber, who was the head of Mandalay Bay Entertainment, and he was once asked to describe the life of an entrepreneur. And the way he described the life of an entrepreneur is sort of the way I would describe life today for all of us, okay? You're floating down the Amazon in a blinding rainstorm, and there's a waterfall ahead, and Indians are shooting arrows at you from the bank. And as you look behind, the guys who are supposed to be paddling are drilling holes in the bottom of the boat, right? And that kind of sums up, what's going on today, right? And the life that we're living in, right? So, there are people that are trying to tear down the country while we're trying to talk about how we can rebuild it. These are the people that are drilling holes in the bottom of the boat. And our own government is so dysfunctional and polarized, and this winner-take-all mentality, the whole two-party system is fundamentally flawed. We've survived with this pendulum. Ruth Bader Ginsburg calls it the pendulum. That basically is swung back and forth between Democrats and Republicans and maintained the social equilibrium. But this two-party system, Washington warned us about it in his inaugural address. It's read every time the U.S. Senate has its opening day. It's read aloud on the floor of the Senate what Washington said about partisanship, and basically what he said is that it's a horribly destabilizing influence, and it finds its worst form in politics, and that's what we're experiencing with the Republican and Democratic Party. So we also, in order to solve our problems, we need to move away from that intense partisanship. Not only do we need to have an open mind, but we need to remain unaffiliated, and we need to remain objective seekers of truth and analysts of information from both sides of the political spectrum. Because if you listen to the Democrats, some of the things that they say are very valid and very just and very right. And some of the things that they say in some segments of them that are suggesting tear down America, they're wrong, right? Or we should move to a socialist society. I believe they're wrong, right? Now, when you listen to the Republicans, some of the things that they say are also good and true and valuable. And some of the things that they say, I also believe are wrong. So we need to cherry pick. When you go into a store, let's say you like a certain designer, whatever the designer happens to be, right? Let's say you're a guy and you like Giorgio Armani, right? And you go into a Giorgio Armani store. Do you like everything? Would you buy everything that's in that store? Because I certainly wouldn't. And I like, Armani, some of his things, right? So when I go into his store, I cherry pick. I look for the things that I really love, and I pass on everything else, right? I just pick the best, the things that are, really to me, the most attractive, right? Well, I do the same thing in virtually everything. I cherry pick. I may hire a graphic designer, and I may only use them for certain tasks that I think they are exceptionally well suited to perform. I may know somebody else that performs something else better. Like one guy might do video and the other woman might do graphic design, right? So on graphic design, I'll go with her, and on video, I'll go with him. I won't go with her and say, do everything, or go with him and say, do everything, right? Well, why would I go to the Democratic Party and wholesale say, okay, I'll follow your platform and buy in wholesale to everything that you're saying? Why would I do that? Why wouldn't I look at what they're saying and then cherry pick and decide what it is that I like and what I think is right, and then look at the other platform and say, well, is there anything over there that I like, right? I like this idea of personal responsibility. I think it's important that people at some point have this feeling and this goal of personal responsibility. But I don't want to shove that concept on someone who is ill-equipped to succeed. I'd rather train them, teach them how to succeed, and then instill the value and the belief in personal responsibility in them once I've given them the ability to perform and be personally responsible, right? So it's that kind of thinking that I think is the thinking that we need. Just more realism and more objectivity, and more of a view towards problem solving and less of a view towards ideology and dogma and teams and tribes and partisanship and all of the shit that we've been, fed and been digesting, for centuries now.
And George, I have to say, I haven't read your entire book yet, but the parts that I've read so far resonate with me so much, because it's all about critical thinking. It's about parking your bias to the side and opening your mind to different ways of thinking. It reminds me of a workshop I attended many years ago, De Bono's 6 Thinking Caps. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I haven't.
6 thinking caps. They analyze, every color has a different way of thinking. Black is everything that'll go wrong. Oh my gosh, look at that. He's got that. White is data. It's all about data, right? Yellow is pie in the sky. What are all the possible benefits? You must put each color on your head. And they actually, in my workshop, use different colors to put on your head, and recognize that there's different ways of looking at every situation, not just your way or the highway, but every way. And your book is all about that. And that's what I love about what I've read. I think I'm up to chapter 20 now. And I'm just loving everything I've read. And I must point out that chapter 11 is all about gratitude. And I'm so grateful that you agreed to present tonight.
Oh.
I mean, how many, look guys, this guy is a renowned speaker, artist, writer, you name it. And he agreed to have a personal meeting with us. This is unbelievable.
Of course. Well, I'm grateful that you invited me and to get to know you all, and I'm grateful that you're reading my book and that you're enjoying it. And I believe that when we talk about education and we talk about the example that you just gave, that is really a big part of the answer. My being here tonight, these are all parts of the answer. The answer is people helping people. The government is not going to come to our rescue. The government is not going to retool and redesign and redeploy the education system in America. It's not going to happen. And so if we keep waiting for that, we're going to be waiting in vain. So and then the predatory model of private businesses that are charging exorbitant amounts of money for people to learn, whether it's a university that's charging you $100,000 over a 4-year period, whether it's, a private university online, whether it's, one of these speakers that is on the internet and, you go to their course and you spend thousands of dollars, all of these things are predatory. And so you have a predatory private model, and you have a dysfunctional public model. And yet that's all people have to learn, right? So we need a better model. And the better model is what you just described with the 6 hats, and what we're doing tonight, and my book, and things like that enrich other people and cause other people to become critical thinkers, to embrace an open mind, to see alternative perspectives as assets. That's the path forward. If we can somehow if the whole country would buy into this concept of we need to help each other, we need to teach each other, we need to lift up and raise each other, we all need to, we are all well served if we are all more intelligent. The more intelligent society is, the more educated society is, the more empowered society is, the more it helps all of us. How does it help me if this gang of kids that are currently standing on street corners selling crack in a depressed neighborhood, if I can take those kids off that sidewalk, stop them from selling drugs, and turn them into entrepreneurs who are invested in America and believe in America and are hopeful about America and become entrepreneurs and now want to teach their children how to become entrepreneurs and want to teach other kids in the neighborhood how to become entrepreneurs. If we can replicate that all over the country in all of these tinderboxes, and we can get government maybe to invest, economic opportunity zones, create incentives for investment. There are all sorts of things they can do with the tax code to make it more attractive for people to be putting money into these areas. You can create, home ownership so that people have an investment in these areas. Chicago, I read, is giving away, you can go to certain parts of Chicago and you can get a lot that has been condemned and is owned by the city. And you might be able to get that lot for as little as $1 if you're willing to go in and develop that lot. If you're going to build a park in that lot, they'll give you the land for $1, right? So, things like that cause people to come in, create vegetable farms, create parks for children, create gathering places for elders to come in and mentor, and speakers to come in and speak. These are the types of things that we need. I talked about this in my first book. I talked about a trip to Bali that I went on. And what I thought that was really cool about Bali, there were a couple of things that impressed me. One was there were these schools that trained people to work in the resorts, right? So the resorts needed servers. They needed, bartenders, waitresses, waiters, front desk people. And the people in Bali, they didn't have those skills. So they would go to a school and they would learn those skills. And professionals from, let's say, Las Vegas, who, understood, entertainment and customer relations and, fine dining and all of these things, they might be an instructor at this school in Bali. And they would teach these kids and they would give them these trade skills. And then these kids would go out and get placed in these various resorts and would have jobs. That was something that impressed me. We need that. We need vocational training all over the United States, programs like that corporations are involved in, and they're at the back end. They help design the programs so that the kids that come out of the programs can go to work in those corporations, right? So that's part of the answer. The other thing they had in Bali that was interesting was they had these public kind of squares, right? These temples that essentially were neighborhood meeting places, right? So they were open air. They had a roof, but otherwise were open air. And families and children and young people would go and they would hang out in those areas at night. And they would just socialize with one another, right? But it was a place. It was a place for building community and building connection, right? And so, you know, people knew where the kids were because they were playing in that square, right? They weren't off in some dark alley somewhere, right? Hanging out with just 2 or 3 of their friends. They were instead in a brightly lit, you know, public square with dozens of kids. And so these types of things, there are things that we can pick up. There are ideas that we can pick up. And it goes back to cherry picking. It's just, you know, finding the right ideas. And one of the biggest ideas that I think I've fallen upon and believe that we need desperately is this concept of people helping other people, right? And teaching other people. So, you know, if you can do a podcast and you have something to share that educates and uplifts and empowers and promotes unity and promotes concepts like gratitude and critical thinking and an open mind, the more people that do that, the more people that will be reached with those programs and those voices. And the better off we'll all be. And so I've been encouraged in the online space. I'm seeing a lot of people that are doing what I'm doing, which is they're writing books these days. They're going online. They're speaking. They're doing podcasts. They're taking advantage of technology and the democratization of media. You don't need a publisher today to publish a book. Nobody sits in judgment of your book except the public, who either chooses to buy it or read it or not. So if you want to write a book, it's absolutely open to you. If you want to have a podcast, if you want to do an online YouTube show, I mean, you know, to be on camera and be presenting something is something that, you know, 15 years ago, I could not have done without a television station hiring me, right? So today, we as a group of 6 or 7 people have joined together and have done this on our own, and we're putting it out there. And now if what we're saying resonates with people, they'll watch it and they'll share it. And so it's dictated by the quality of your message. Your reach is dictated by the quality of your message. One of the things that we also need to solve, another problem we need to solve, is if you think about the Enlightenment. Okay, so go back to the original Enlightenment period, right, where the Gutenberg press was first created, and knowledge could now be memorialized and printed and reproduced and distributed. And there were pamphlets, and there were brochures, and there were literary salons, and there were coffee houses. And this is what created the first Enlightenment, right? Well, now I believe technology has created an opportunity for a second Enlightenment, right? The tool that we are using today, this internet, Zoom technology, creates an opportunity for a massive second Enlightenment, right? Where the entire population can become even more educated and more empowered than ever before. But instead, we're using this incredibly powerful technology and tools like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. These are all very powerful tools, but we're using them for frivolity, right? We're using them for entertainment, right? As opposed to education and enlightenment. And so it's a waste. It's like I don't know. It's like giving a 5-year-old, putting a 5-year-old behind the wheel of a Ferrari, and they just sit there and they don't do anything with it. They beep the horn and it never moves. you know, versus what that Ferrari is capable of. You know, this technological tool that we have is a Ferrari. It's got this incredible power, and we're not using it to the degree that we can and that we should. So how we do that, how we turn that around, is another issue. But that's something that that we need to be talking about. I think
totally agree with that. I think we are using it to a minuscule extent. So
Yeah.
we have to ramp that up big time.
Yeah, big time. So, you know, Congress just had hearings where they brought in the four horsemen, right? Microsoft, Amazon, Google, who else?
Bezos.
Yeah, Bezos. So they bring them all in, and they're asking them various questions, but really the focus, I think, ought to be on what we just talked about, which is how do we take these incredible technologies that you've created, and how do we use them for the public good, right? For the betterment of humanity.
And you know what? I go back, the millennials need to help us with that, because those of us that didn't grow up with technology don't know how to make it happen right away.
Yeah.
So I think we need to you know, get together. And
Yes.
Lisa,
To go along with the metaphors, we're 5-year-olds ourselves behind the Ferrari. We're doing
Yeah.
the best we can. Right now with the TikTok and the girls grinding on the videos and whatnot, that's the 5-year-old honking the horn. It sounds cool. It seems fun. The 5-year-old's laughing. We're laughing looking at the videos, but you're absolutely right. I hope that as the generation grows and matures and realizes the potential, especially like me, myself, realizing the potential of the impact it's going to have on my 1-year-old as he gets older, hopefully we can get better at harnessing the Ferrari. Hopefully skip the 10-year-old driving and crashing into a tree and destroying everything. Hopefully we don't go through that part of the maturing process. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential that's untapped. And but actually more to the point, there's a lot of my friends that are my age that are getting a lot of political data that wouldn't know about the BLM movement at all if it weren't for Snapchat or Instagram or any, you know, most of my friends aren't watching CNN or Fox News. They're watching, you know, Snapchats of people, human beings holding their phones on the street in Portland, and my phone gets to look through that phone at what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think there's a case that can be said that we're getting closer to handling the Ferrari.
Well, the interesting thing is that so let's talk about that for a minute, because there are a lot of phenomenons that are going on here with regard to this new technology. So first of all, I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand the significance of the Ferrari. Okay, that it is this massively powerful, you know, turbocharged Ferrari that can fly. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. Okay, and it's not a toy. It's not a toy. The other thing is that, you know, just like when you look at the 1960s and the perverse incentive that the government created in the war on poverty to help out young girls by, you know, giving them a home if they got pregnant and the guy moved out, that was a perverse incentive, right? Well, think about the incentives that we're creating in social media, right? So not only are you able to watch what's happening in Baltimore or in, you know, Chicago or in LA during these riots, but the next time you watch these rioters, notice something. Notice how many of them are holding a cell phone. Okay? Almost the vast majority of them are holding cell phones and are filming. Because today, posting things on social media that are entertaining or that capture the imagination or the attention of the viewer is something that we're all engaged in. I'm doing it, young people are doing it, everybody is doing it. We're looking for things to post. Well, what better to post than to go out and post pictures of a burning police car or of a massive crowd marching down the street? I mean, that's more interesting and more dramatic than anything else these young people have to post, right? There's nothing that they could post that would be as dramatic as, 100,000 people marching down the street and burning cop cars, right? So when the call goes out to come to this protest, a lot of these people are showing up for very different reasons. Some of them are going out to legitimately protest about George Floyd. Some of them are there because they're anarchists and want to tear down the United States. Some of them are there because they support the LGBTQ movement, right? And so does BLM. Some of them are there because they want to capture or participate in or be part of this historical event. And some of them are there because they want footage for their Instagram feed or their TikTok feed, or they want to become famous, right? So they're looking for that shot. They're looking for that shot that's going to go viral, the cop beating up on the protester, right? Some of them are even staging these types of things, right? So they may have 3 or 4 people that are friends that say, okay, we're going to create a viral video, and you're going to go out and I'm going to film it, and you're going to tackle the cop, and I'm going to get it all on tape, and you might get beat up, but it's going to be really cool. We're going to get this great footage and we're going to post it. I mean, there's all sorts of motivations that are going on to what it is. And then now you really don't know about all those motivations as you're consuming this stuff. So you're consuming this stuff and you're thinking, I'm just watching chaos. I'm watching carnage, and the country is going to hell, and Rome is burning. And that's what you as the consumer are getting out of it. But what you're not seeing is, what is this crowd really made up of? Who are these people? What are they doing out there? What are their different goals and objectives? BLM was also given $100 million in funding, $100 million. They're running ads on network television, raising money. So they are becoming an institution. They have been funded to become an institution. And so, the organizers that are out there, this is not an organic movement. This is by no means an organic movement. If this was not a presidential election year, George Floyd would have died in silence. There would not have been these protests. There might have been 1 or 2 days of protests, and that would have been it. They wouldn't have been going on for weeks after weeks after weeks after weeks. This is not organic. This is organized. This is funded. And so there are funded, people that are hiring paid protesters, hiring political agitators, hiring protest leaders, and they're out driving this. And then there are young people who are just caught up in the moment, who believe in the concept of Black Lives Matter, who want racial justice, who want to create change, and they're joining the movement. And so some of them, are very legitimately interested in important social issues. Some of them are out there for a good time. Some of them are out there to capture footage. Some of them are out there because they are protesting about very different issues that have nothing to do with George Floyd. They're protesting about economic inequality. They're protesting about the haves and the have-nots. They're protesting about a dysfunctional government. They're protesting about a corrupt banking system. So it's really kind of hard to say that this is a movement about any one issue. It's essentially a movement about public angst and public dissatisfaction with the direction of the country in many different areas that is being fueled and agitated by political donors that want a change in power during a presidential election. That's what we're seeing.
George,
And,
Parisa has her hand raised. I overlooked that earlier. Parisa, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Actually, the question has changed. Thank you so much, George, for sharing all your thoughts and you said before you like contrarian opinions and you always
Yes.
want people to change. So just based on what your last statement was about how the movements that we're seeing are not um, related to George Floyd, but more of angst against economic and governmental structures. I want to,
Well,
I,
hold on, Teresa. Hold
yes,
on. Let me just clarify, because to the extent that you took that, I didn't say that it's not about George Floyd.
well,
I said that it's about many things. One of which is George Floyd.
but thank you. What I want to understand, or what I want to hear from you is how they are unrelated. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about capitalism, and I'm a critical thinker, so I was listening to you saying critical theory is cultural Marxism uses critical theory to tear down systems. And I would say that the United States, founded on democracy, of course, I don't know at what point capitalism became like an underpinning of the economic system, but by design, it seems that it kind of did work by design where there are winners and there are losers. And what's happened for such a long time is that systems were put in place to preserve the power and progress of the winners in the system, those with access to capital, and to, I guess, to use the word, suppress or oppress the quote losers in the system so their voices can't be heard. But like you say, because of Apple and technology, and we have cell phones now, we've democratized information. So we're seeing things that have always been. If you go back to the origins of policing, the Runaway Slave Patrol was one of the early policing systems in this country. And it wasn't designed to protect a woman slave from being raped or having sexual favors for the master. It was designed to protect the masters and the slave owners from their property, being their slaves leaving or revolting or whatever. So it's all tied to economics. So what I see, this is just, again, I'm still forming my opinions. This is just from what I see and from what I learned in my life, but I'm definitely malleable and I'm definitely learning. But to me, it's like the system worked as designed, haves and have nots. Resources are finite. We live in South Florida on the water. There's only but so much coastal land. Not everyone can have a house on the water. So there's got to be a way to allocate resources. So, capitalism as opposed to, let's say, socialism, like everyone, quote, being equal with the universal basic income. Well, it's like giving everyone a book. You can give everyone, a school kid, the same book. But if a kid is going home and they don't have lights, they can't read the book until past 7 o'clock because there's no daylight, or it's noisy, or there's no food, that's not really equal. Or if you, like, I tutor kids. I've tutored these kids, they're twins, and one needs more help than the other. And I remember one saying, well, I don't want to take time from my sister. They want to have equal 1 hour. And I'm thinking, no, one kid needs more than an hour. The other one can do 50 minutes. The other one can do 70 minutes because they're really not equal. So where is the basis of the equality? Is it the time that I spend or trying to get them to the certain point? But at the end of the day, by design, capitalism, or like you say, you were in Bali, there were servers. Not everyone is supposed to get to that same point because there are other jobs that need different skills. So you're not going to have everyone being like Tim Cook running Apple or being, attorney general. There's all these range of jobs. So it's kind of like it's designed that way. And at some point we did decide as a country that we would, quote unquote, socialize certain things that we felt were rights. And that's where, like Bernie Sanders always says, healthcare is a right, not a privilege. So we decided K through 12, I guess public education would be a right. And as you mentioned, because there was probably an economic need to train people to a certain degree to do certain jobs. And now if robots are going to take these jobs, then we don't need to have K through 12 education. Or back to student loan for higher ed, it becomes a way of making it not, it's like you're putting obstacles to encourage people not to become further educated. So if you have the means, the finances, you can go to college without debt if your parents can pay for it. If not, it's going to make it so hard for you. You're going to put you with $100,000 debt. You never can discharge them, like you said, in bankruptcy. So it makes you kind of not want to do it. So it's kind of like the way, like, you know, a long time ago, they didn't want Black people to be educated. So they didn't want them to learn to read, et cetera. Because if you're educated, it's harder to control somebody. And like, resources are finite. I mean, we're not talking about love and smiles and hugs. Those are infinite. Those are really what matter. But we're talking about resources and economics, and how do you allocate those, and what system is successful or what system would be a failure. So when we look at systems around the world, you know, just seeing what's a failed system and what's a successful system depends on where you're coming from. Also, I would say one more thing. If you look at people being the angst in society, sometimes it comes from not necessarily the way a system is, but what you expect it to be. And here, there is an expectation of the American dream, the hope, the pursuit of happiness. There's an expectation of being able to rise above your lot. In other countries, there isn't that expectation. You're born into a certain lot in life, and therefore you're just going to stay there, and you don't have as much angst. You can go to very poor countries around the world, and people are happy and smiling and laughing. You think, how can it possibly be that someone with nothing can be so happy? But part of it is the hypocrisy of what you expect, or what you're told is possible, or you're told that if you just work harder. I mean, look, us in this group, we have a lot of privilege. I have so much privilege. The brain that I was born with, the parents I was born to, I mean, I have so much privilege. I go and just turn the water on and water comes out of the sink. I don't have to carry water for 3 miles a day. I mean, we have so much that we don't even recognize it, you know? So anyway, that was a long, but I had a lot of things I wanted to put, so if you can unpack whatever you want.
All right, well, I first of all, thank you. Thank you for participating tonight and for sharing your views. It's very important. And I heard everything that you said, and there's a lot there to unpack. And I'm not going to be able to unpack it all because I can't even remember all of it. But I made a few notes, and let me tell you what I can tell you. Okay, first of all, it is fantastic that you are engaged and involved, and that you are a critical thinker. Okay, that alone is a huge benefit, not only to yourself and to your family, but to your community and to your country. So that's a great thing. So never lose that. Stay engaged, stay involved, and remain a critical thinker. Okay, and then we also talked about an open mind, and I would encourage you to really have an open mind about some of the things that you may be thinking, some of the things that your teachers may have told you, some of the things that you may be hearing from your friends, or professors or teachers or people like Bernie Sanders, right? Because some of it is true and some of it is not as true. And some of it is outright false. And you're going to have to learn to distinguish what all of that is. And you're going to have to make judgments and opinions and decisions based on, you know, the information that's available to you about what is true and what's false, what's real and what's not real. There are a number of things that I would say to you. The first would be your point about unrealized expectations is a huge point. Okay, you pointed out that in some countries, the poor can be very happy, right? So you can see kids playing on a dirt field with a poorly inflated soccer ball, and think that they are just having the greatest time and laughing and giggling, and or they're playing on the bank of a river that's polluted and they're smiling and laughing and happy. You know, why is it that these kids can be happy and kids that are living in a similar circumstance in the United States, or adults in the United States, are less happy or traumatized by a lack of upward mobility, where someone in a third world country would be less traumatized and consider it to be, just the way things are, right? So one of the things that we know about depression is that depression in large part comes from unrealized expectations. when you expect A and you get B, you're depressed, right? I mean, we even see these ridiculous videos of a privileged, typically white teenager of a wealthy parent. The parent pulls up, a white BMW or a red BMW, and the 16-year-old girl's birthday party, and she's complaining because it's not, sapphire blue, right? Whereas somebody else would be, dying with gratitude for that BMW, right? But she's, turned into this little, spoiled, entitled brat that doesn't receive it the same way. So expectations are a huge issue, right? And part of happiness is controlling your expectations, right? So, when you were a child, you could walk out into the rain or into the snow, or you could look at a mirror for the first time, or you could see a flower open up for the first time, or you could see a bunny rabbit for the first time, and it would be the greatest thing in the world, right? The average child smiles something like 400 times an hour, and the average adult smiles 20 times, right? Why are the children smiling so much, and why are we not? Because they still see the magic in that mirror. To them, it's new. It's interesting. They don't understand it. It's magnificent. To us, it's old news, right? And we've been out in the rain many times. It's not fun anymore. It's an inconvenience. To a child, it's fun. It's great. It's interesting. So it's how we look at things. There's an ancient saying that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. So always remember that. You see the world not as it is. You see it the way you are. And so, your life experience, the teachers that you've had, the people that you've listened to, has imprinted on your software. And now when you judge information and you judge events, you judge them through this software that you've created over time. Your brain has been receiving 11 million bits of information per second since you were born. 98% of that information is coming into your brain outside of your conscious awareness, through your unconscious brain. You're not even aware of the information that's coming in, but it's imprinting. And it's causing you to see things and to analyze things a certain way. Be aware of that. Just be aware of it, okay? And so you have biases. We all have biases. I've experienced the same 11 million bits of information a second, and it's imprinted on me, and I have biases, and I look at the world a certain way through my, rose-colored glasses, and you through your blue-tinted glasses, and, it's natural that we would see things a little differently. What the important part is in recognizing that we have this difference in perspective, recognizing that I can learn from yours and you can learn from mine, and recognizing that neither one of them is necessarily the truth, but that what we're both after is the truth, okay? And if that's what you're after, and that's certainly what I'm after, okay? So, and I believe it should be what we're all after. But now let's you talked about America and kind of the premise upon which it was founded, and how essentially the game was somewhat rigged from the beginning. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. I don't believe. First of all, let me say this. You acknowledge that in another country, in a poorer country, you don't have these expectations, so you can be happy with nothing. But in America, you have these expectations, and so when you don't have a better life, you feel disappointed. You feel like the country has let you down. You have not gotten what you thought you were going to get, or what you thought that
the premise of equality is what
the premise of equality, the premise of the American dream being available to everyone, right? Okay, so the when America was first founded, they were trying to cobble together a government, right? there's a good film on that. I believe it's on Netflix. It's called Hamilton. It's about and it's probably patterned after the Broadway show Hamilton, but it's a documentary about Hamilton's life. And it talks about, and it's very educational because it shows you what they were going through as they were trying to put the country together. And Hamilton was one of the people that believed in a bigger federal government, a stronger federal government, right? And Hamilton was responsible for creating the US banking system. And at the very beginning, when you're trying to put together a government, you need that government to be economically viable, right? It's like a business. You're trying to build a business. It's going to need money. And so how are you going to get the money, right? So one of the things Hamilton did was he set up the whole Federal Reserve System. And one of the things that we live with today is that the Federal Reserve has private ownership that is involved in the Federal Reserve. And this goes back to Hamilton, right? And goes back to the founding of the country. And the reason that they brought in private investors was because they thought that the country would be stronger, more economically strong, more viable, more likely to survive, more likely to grow if they did this. And so that gave this group of wealthy merchants and investors who became part of that, mostly white men, right? It gave them an economic advantage that was with us from the beginning of the birth of the nation, because we needed that. We thought we needed that. Hamilton thought we needed that to build a sustainable economic engine, okay? So in any case, I'm not saying that that's the way it should be today. I'm saying that we can understand why it was created the way it was when it was created. It wasn't some nefarious design to try to empower the white man over other people. It was to try to leverage the assets of the white man who had the assets at that point in history to become the underwriter of the government to create a more successful government. So that's how it began. There wasn't I don't believe a racial motivation behind any of that. There was an economic motivation. If all the people at that time who had money were, wealthy black kings, then they would have given the wealthy black kings part of the Federal Reserve, right? They would have been the ones who underwrote the government, right? It's just at the time they didn't have the money. And so the money came from who had it, and it was generally white males, right? So understanding part of the birth of this nation is important, and understanding that it wasn't a system designed to harm minorities. It was a system designed to leverage the wealth of white males towards underwriting the system. That's the first thing. Second thing is the way the country was created was not a democracy. In fact, the word democracy does not appear in any of our founding documents. You won't find the word democracy in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or the Declaration of Independence, because we are not a democracy. We are a republic. And why were we a republic? Okay, why were we a republic? Because the founders, when they investigated other governments, other forms of government, they were trying to create their own government. And as they were investigating other forms of government, they found that democracies eventually failed historically. That as they looked around the world and looked back in history from before the American Revolution, they looked back at the Greeks and the Romans and the Europeans, and they saw time after time where democracies had failed. And so they understood, as Aristotle did in his writings in politics, he talks about the haves and the have-nots, that there will always be more people that do not have money and do not have wealth and do not have education, there will always be more poor than there will be wealthy. And that's just, the nature of economics. And that's always been the case. And so Aristotle knew this, and John Adams and George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, they all knew this. And so they knew that if you always had more people without money and fewer people with money, that eventually the larger group would want what the smaller group has. And that unless you had a system in place, the larger group, if it was a democracy, then the larger group would just simply vote to take everything that the smaller group has and divide it among everyone, right? That's what the larger group would vote. And so that's why you don't have a democracy, because they knew that they could not build the kind of society and government that would sustain itself and that would grow and that would be as successful as America has been if they had a democracy. So they needed to balance, because at the end of the day, if you think about it, if you want to provide for the general welfare of the disenfranchised and the poor and the people that need more help, like the example you gave in tutoring, right? If you want to provide for this person who needs more help, right? Think about it on a governmental type of structure, right? You need to create a structure that generates revenue so that you can pay for the free education and the free health care and the free public transportation and the parks and all the things that you want for society. Somebody has to pay for that, right? Yeah. Well, the poor don't have the money to pay for it. Right. So you need an economic engine. You need the wealthy to pay for it, right? So a truly great society is not a socialist society that tries to divide our wealth equally, because that society will lack an education, an economic engine, not an education, an economic engine, okay? That is a formidable economic engine that can pay for all of these social services. Mm-hmm. So you have to have both. You have to have a society that cares about taking care of its poor, taking care of its elderly, taking care of its handicapped, taking care of its disadvantaged and marginalized. You need a society that does that. But you also need a society that has a strong economic engine that can be successful, that can create the next, SpaceX or the next, General Motors or whatever companies are America's great companies, the next Alphabet, the next Google, the next Facebook. You need this economic technological advancement, that kind of wealth that then can be deployed to the benefit of these other people in society that are not doing as well. You need both. You need the economic engine and you need the social programs, all right? That's a hybrid. That's like a Prius, right? It doesn't run all on gas, and it doesn't run all on electricity. It runs on both, okay? And socialism is an all-electric vehicle, and capitalism is an all-fossil fuel vehicle. And the right system is really more like the Prius, that can have the power of the economic engine of capitalism, but then that uses that wealth creation to do the right thing and to help the other people in society that need help. If you don't do it that way, if instead you say, you know what, let's get rid of capitalism. Capitalism is the bane of our existence. It's a horrible system. It's a winner take all. It doesn't care about the poor. It's just a god-awful system. Let's embrace socialism, okay? I can tell you right now that will not work in the United States. And the reason that it will not work, you have only to look to Greece, the recent example of Greece, right? I happen to be Greek, okay? Now, I had a friend who told me months ago, he said, Chanos, what happened to you Greeks? You had a 3,000-year head start on the rest of humanity, and you fucked it up, and now you're bankrupt, right? What happened to you guys, right? And the what happened was that the Greeks were an enlightened culture. Okay, my forefathers were an enlightened culture. Okay, and we wanted the glorious society. We wanted to take care of our poor and our elderly. And we allowed people, if you were a postal worker in Greece, you got to retire at 55 years old at 95% of your income. Okay? So you only work till 55, and now you're not having to work anymore. You can go sit on this beautiful beach and collect 95% of your salary. That's a hell of a deal, right? That's socialism, right? So now what happened? Well, where did that money come from? How are you paying this postal worker?
Sorry to interrupt you. Is that socialism? I'm not advocating for socialism, by the way, but is that socialism, or is that bad modeling that allows the retirement at that age and according to the life expectancy? Because like when our Social Security was put in place here, it wasn't based on a life expectancy of whatever, 78 or 80. It was based on probably like 65. So is that really socialism, or just bad financial modeling?
Well, it's both. So the idea, it's both. It's the socialist philosophy that somebody would retire at 95% or a large portion of their income for life without being productive because they're older and they're less able to work, and we want to take care of them. That part of the mindset or the philosophy or the government is a socialist philosophy. The modeling of, at what age they retire and how much they get, that's discretionary. And you're right, that was done poorly. It was done, to an excess. Okay. So now what happened? What's important is what happened. What happened is, where did the money come from? Right? Well, the money had to come from the taxpayers, right? It had to come from people that were paying into the system, right? Well, so most of the tax-paying Greeks, the wealthy Greeks in particular, the shipbuilders, for example, or the shipping owners, they started to withdraw from the tax-paying system. So what they did was they started to title their ships. So they were being taxed. They were being taxed at a very high rate in order for this postal worker and everyone else to retire comfortably at an early age. They were being taxed, whether it's 60, 70, 80, 90% of their income. The rates over time would fluctuate, but they were always high. Yeah. And they got to a point where they were too high, that the guy who was paying the taxes said to himself, why am I paying so much in taxes to live in Greece and to be a Greek citizen so that this guy can retire at 55 years old at 95% of his income? I don't like that. I don't want to pay for it. I don't think it's fair. So what did they do? They retitled their ships out of Greece in Cyprus or the Bahamas or the Dominican Republic, where Greece couldn't tax them. And then they cheated on their taxes. They lied about their income and they didn't pay taxes. And the Greeks didn't have enough people to go and enforce, just like the United States doesn't have enough people to go and enforce the payment of those taxes. If a large segment of American society said, I'm not paying my taxes, go fuck yourself, okay? You would have no way to enforce that. Right. You could not collect the money, okay? And so what you have to be careful of is that if you create a system that disincentivizes, so Joe Biden will tell you that he's going to increase your taxes. And I like Joe Biden. I've met with him several times. I've met with him in New York. I've met with him in DC. I've met with him in Las Vegas. I've had lunch with him. I like Joe Biden. He's a good, decent human being. Okay, I like him. And I'm not sure I may end up voting for him. We'll see. But I'm waiting. I want to hear the debates. I want to hear, I don't need to make my decision right now. I'll make my decision in November. But I have an open mind. I have an open mind to both of these candidates, to all of these people. And I'm going to listen to what they have to say right up until the end. And I'm going to see what they do right up until the end. And then I'll make a decision. But in any case, Joe Biden tells us he's going to raise our taxes. Well, depending upon how much he raises them and what he uses that money for, certain people who are paying into that system may do what the Greek ship owners did. They may say, you know what? Screw it. I don't like what he's doing. I don't like where he's spending, and I don't like how much he's taking, right? I'll go out and bust my ass, and I'll pay you 30, 40, 50, even 60% of my income into taxes. But if you start charging me 70% or 80%, and out of every dollar I make, I only get to keep 20 cents and 80 cents goes to the government, I personally may say, I'm out of here. I'm gone. I'm not paying. I'm not doing it. Okay. Now, if that happens, you lose the economic engine that you need for all of your social services.
Yes.
This is exactly what happened in Greece. Now, what did the Greek government, the socialist Greek government, do in response to that? Did they cut back? Did they modify the modeling that you suggest? Did they say, okay, we're going to make the guy retire at 65, not 55, and we're going to make him retire at 75% of his income instead of 95% of his income? Did they make changes? Or did they try to find more money to keep the game going and to continue to pay this guy because they felt if they started taking away his pensions and taking away his benefits, that then he would revolt, and he was their constituency, he was their voter, he was their base, he was their supporter, so they didn't want to take away from him. So what did they do? They went out and they borrowed the money. So they went to the Chinese, and they went to the Germans, and they said, hey, will you guys, and about banking. Typically, if you go to a bank and you say, hey, loan me some money, the bank typically says, what's your source of repayment, right?
Right.
And normally, if you don't have a source of repayment, they don't loan you the money, okay, at all. So if Germany and the Chinese looked at Greece, they would have said, you have no source of repayment, you have no tax base, you're collecting only this amount of money and you're spending this amount of money. There's no way you will ever be able to pay back this loan. There's no way in hell I'm going to give you a loan. That's what a normal banker would say.
Right.
But that's not what happened in Greece with the Germans and the Chinese. Instead, what they said was, what's your collateral?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of collateral do you have? And the Greeks said, well, we've got some wonderful collateral. We've got this, the port of Piraeus, one of the great ports in the world. We've got this magnificent airport. We've got these railroads. We've got these highways. We've got these beachfront property. We've got these islands. We've got these historical treasures. We've got all these wonderful things that we can put up as collateral. And so the Germans and the Chinese loaned them money based on the collateral that they provided. And then, as anyone could have predicted, the Greeks had no revenue stream from their taxpayers because they had already checked out and disengaged. They defaulted. So now they defaulted. So that triggered covenants in their loans that allowed the Chinese and the Germans to say, okay, you're defaulted. I now have access to your collateral. I can now take the port of Piraeus and I can put it up for sale to pay off your loan. And then they put up the port of Piraeus for sale, and guess what? There's not a lot of buyers. There's not a lot of buyers for the port of Piraeus because you got to be a pretty unique buyer. Number one, you got to have a lot of money. Number two, you got to need a port, right? Number three, you're going to be bidding against the German and Chinese government's debt, right? So what happened? Today, the government of China owns the port of Piraeus, and they got it for pennies on the dollar. Okay, so now, you know how you do that? Now who's the big winner there? Who's the big winner there?
The one that had the money to loan.
Yes, the one who had the money to loan. The one who had the money to loan, they're the big winner, right? They got all these assets for pennies on the dollar. Now, let me paint a hypothetical for you, okay? What if I were one of those big money lenders? And what if I were to find a guy like Bernie Sanders? And I'm not saying Bernie is the, you know, the pawn in some play on behalf of international creditors, but I am saying that let's say you had a guy like Bernie, okay, and he came out and he created these expectations that you talk about, right? So he created the expectation, everybody, universal health care is a right. It's a right. You deserve it. You should have it. You must have it. It's a human right. Education, you should have it. It's a right. You must have it, okay? Now, understand that we have a healthcare system that the cost of which has been going through the roof for the last several decades. There's been no effort on the part of Congress to really control costs. In fact, the only thing Trump recently signed by executive order a requirement that pharmaceutical companies must give the United States favored nation pricing on pharmaceuticals, meaning today, if I go up to Canada, I can buy certain prescription drugs for 10 cents on the dollar of what I pay for the exact same drug in the United States. Yeah. I've researched this. I've written on this. There's no excuse for it.
No, they do all the R&D here.
Well, yeah, we do all the R&D here. We do all the R&D here, and the R&D is expensive, but we're creating the safest drugs in the world, yep. And that cost, that R&D should be divided along all of the purchasers all over the world because they're all getting the benefit of having the safest drugs in the world. Not just Americans are getting the benefit of that, everybody's getting the benefit of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we should not pay more than Canadians for drugs. Canadians have a different philosophy. They have a different method of providing drugs. They say to the pharmaceutical companies, here's the difference. In America, we passed the Reg D prescription drug benefit bill. The pharmaceutical companies lobby state and federal authorities for a decade. They spend $1 billion. There was
George, your internet's fluctuating. No. Cindy, you're on mute. Can you hear him?
No, I don't hear him. He
said his internet was a little bit weak. No.
But we need to shut this down. 2 hours is a long time.
Okay.
Isn't he fascinating?
Yes. He knows about so many different things.
Yeah, he's gone. He is fascinating. And Parisa, Lisa, Parisa is a fellow Toastmaster.
Hey, we're recording. So.
Oh, let me stop recording.